I have a problem. I have a lot of problems, but the problem that I have today is that every time I walk through this door, the first thing I see is that. This is my PDP-1144, and every time I walk in the room, I see this gaping hole of failure right here, and it just saps every last ounce of motivation that I have for this project. So what we're gonna do today is we're gonna make this thing look pretty. Most everything is still gonna be broken, but by golly, it's gonna look good. Now this is a classic case of about 550 pounds of stuff trying to fit into a 20-pound bag. So we've got a bit of work ahead of us today. First and foremost is the data terminal, which in this case is a very heavy deck rainbow. Next is the 1144 itself, which is also very heavy. This combo is pretty awesome. On my left, we have the deck Rainbow. This has a Z80 and an 8088 in it. It can boot into CP/M as well as MS-DOS. Has a hard drive and the full color monitor. This is like the highest spec'd out deck Rainbow you can get, and it is being woefully underutilized with this epic machine to my right, which is a PDP-1144. This is the last non-LSI PDP-11 that was ever built, meaning that the CPU is built out of pretty much discrete components. It takes up like 8 cards. And I want to build this thing out to be the coolest PDP-1144 on the planet. It has currently 1 megabyte of memory, but there's enough space to push that all the way to 4 megabytes, and I have all the cards I need to do that. It also has the commercial instruction set in it, which really fleshes out the CPU, and a whole lot of backplane slots waiting for expansion. And that expansion is going to come in the form of course, some kind of storage, as well as some supercomputing components. And therein lies the problem. The PDP-1144 here sits right up here, which means that we only have this tiny amount of space left over to stuff a full-blown supercomputer as well as storage. For the supercomputer, we're going to use two things. We're going to use the FPS 100. I have the front panel to one right here. And we're going to stuff an FPS 3000 in here, which acts as a co-processor to the FPS 100. So we should be pushing something like 20 megaflops of performance out of this PDP-1144, which definitely pushes it into super mini territory. But how on earth am I going to stuff two things that are this tall in this tiny amount of space and have enough room left over for a drive? Let's focus on supercomputing first, which means we need to get anything that is not related to the FPS system or the 1144 itself out of here. This DSD dual 8-inch floppy drive is actually just sitting on top of some little sliders that I installed. So after removing the 2 screws, it should just slide right on out. It's also very heavy. Now this tray I actually installed to put some hard drives on, but as you can see, it's just kind of turned into card storage, which is like an atrocious use for it. So also it's right in the way. So all this has to come out. So we'll just go ahead and get to work on that. This thing is such a tight fit. There we go. With that tray out of the way, we have the preamp. Oh, the preamp. This stupid thing. It's this bane of my existence. Preamp hard drive. I suppose we should talk about the preamp here. Man, like, I was super amped up about this drive. It's a 14-inch platter, it's period correct, and despite some pretty catastrophic damage that had happened to the analog board, we did a ton of work, and this thing seems like it wants to spin up and load the heads and is ready to be used. I thought this was gonna be the perfect solution to our hard drive woes on the PDP-11, but I'm a big dum-dum, and I didn't realize until way too late that this is the preamp interface, not the SMD interface, which means there is no way that I can ever use this drive with that machine. But this might actually be a blessing in disguise, because if I want to fit both the FPS 100 and FPS 3000 in that rack, this is going to take up way too much real estate. It's never going to fit. So I got to come up with a smaller hard drive solution so I can get both of those supercomputers into that tiny space. And if we want to have any hope of getting all of that supercomputing goodness to fit into this tiny rack, we're going to have to use every last available millimeter of space, which means that this very cool power sequencing unit it's got to go. It can't stay. It takes up way too much space. So out it comes. And on the front side here, they have this nice little trim panel to block off the lower portion of the chassis so that you don't install something that's going to run into that power distribution unit that was going on in the back. But we need all the space we can get, so that's got to come off as well. Now I can already hear y'all yelling at the screen telling me to either get a taller rack or expand out to 2 racks. It was very common for PDP-11s to have multiple racks this size, but I can't do either of those things. I don't have enough space in this room to put the data terminal anywhere else except for on top of this rack. So if the rack were to get taller, the data terminal would be too tall to use. Right now, it's the perfect height to use like a standing desk. I also can't expand out to 2 racks because, again, there's not any available space in this room. So everything has to fit in this tiny amount of space. Alley-oop. This is an FPS 100. It's the front panel from an FPS 100. The rest of it is in pieces or non-existent, but the FPS 100 can churn along at 8 megaflops, which is an impressive amount of processing power for the late 1970s. But on my left here is an FPS 3000. This employs something called the XP32 processor, and this whole box was an add-on co-processor for the FPS 100. And this adds an extra 18 megaflops to the total processing power, which means we can push this combo up to 26 megaflops of really early 1980s processing power, which is out of this world. Now the FPS 100, I have the front panel and I have a full set of cards, but that's it. I don't have a backplane, I don't have a power supply, I don't have a chassis. But I'm not too worried about that actually, because I got in touch with Mr. White, who is the architect of the FPS 100. His job was to take the AP120B architecture and miniaturize it down into the FPS 100. And he had a full set of schematics, which means that we now know the pinout of every single card and we can build a new backplane from scratch. But even if we have the backplane, we're still like missing all the stuff that like holds the backplane and holds the cards and has the power supply. We're missing the chassis. But as best as we can tell, the chassis for the FPS 3000 and the chassis for the FPS 100 are identical. So using this as a blueprint, we can actually make a new chassis as well. And while that may be a bit out of my skill set, it's not out of the skill set of my buddy John, who runs CAD Industries up in Massachusetts. He is an absolute artist when it comes to metalworking, so I'm gonna lean on his expertise. We're gonna build a new chassis for the FPS 100. But like none of that stuff is happening today. All I wanna do is get both of these in there mocked up and hopefully mounted so I can kind of see how much space I have left over for a hard drive. But they're so gross looking. Like, look at this yellow. This is disgusting. This is honestly some of the yellowest plastic I've ever come across. It is hideously ugly. Like, this is supposed to be white. Let's get to work getting this thing clean. And the first step is to fully dismantle it. The metal panel on the back here is held on with 4 screws, and with it out of the way, we have access to the front lights and power switch PCB, which is also held in with 4 screws. Finally, we got to get the side clamp things loose. These are held in with 2 screws each. Next, let's also pull the FPS 3000 front panel off. It's not sun faded or yellowed, but it is very beat up and needs a clean. After removing the 7 screws around the periphery, it just pops right off. And now that I can see a little more clearly inside, it is gross and needs a deep clean too. Back on the front panel, we need to remove the front lights and power switch PCB here too. After unplugging the plug, it's just 4 screws holding it on as well. Finally, the air intake grill is held in place with 8 screws. With those out, I can peel it free. And with both panels stripped down, it's time to give them a solid clean. Which means it's time for some simple green. I'll soak both panels, then give them a good scrub to knock any filth loose. and finally give them a spray down with the hose. Now, I'm not a big fan of retro brighting. I feel like it can actually weaken the plastic, making it more brittle. And when dealing with 1970s plastic, that's a dangerous game to play. So instead, I'm going to throw some paint on this one. It should protect the plastic for many years to come. After masking off the black areas I want to protect, I pulled out 600 grit sandpaper and really went to work on getting the plastic smooth and ready for paint. The paint I'll be using is just run-of-the-mill house paint, but it has been color matched to an existing PDP-11 panel that I had. Then out comes the spray gun and I get to work. This spray gun was actually my father-in-law's, and I've painted all sorts of things with it, from the Data 620 to Centurion terminals and even to an entire car. While the paint is drying on the FPS 100 panel, let's get to work on the FPS 3000 panel. You can see that one corner has been bent way out of shape here, and something ran into the grill frame, pushing it in way too far. It nearly ripped through the spot weld and really twisted the metal. First, to get the corner right, I'll toss it in the vise and carefully bend it straight again. Then for the grill frame, I'll grab a punch and a hammer and slowly tap it back into shape. I really want to save the paint on this one if possible, so there's a lot of cleanup that's going to happen. While I'm in the cleaning mood, let's try to tidy up the chassis a bit as well. To get to the card cage, there are just 4 screws holding the side panel on, and to get to the back plane and power supply, there are 6 screws holding on this panel. Let's pull all the cards out because they are equally filthy, and you can see that a lot of the card cage is already empty. And that's because you can really expand this system out. Right now I only have 1 memory card, but you could add up to 5 total. And there are 2 extra slots for an additional XP32 processor. With the cards safely out, it's time for more simple green and elbow grease. And one more thing that I want to handle is actually the power cord. This thing is power hungry, needing 15 amps with a full card cage. And with that much juice moving, I don't really trust the original power cord. I'll just remove it for the time being, and when we're ready to power it up, I'll put a proper modern power cord in it, rated for the current it needs. The last order of business is cleaning the cards. I've had really good luck using the paintbrush method in the past, and then a spray down with the air hose gets it all out of there. And the cards come out looking really fresh at the end. About 2 weeks ago, it was like 5 in the morning and I couldn't sleep, and I was thinking about how best to stuff the FPS 3000, FPS 100, and 1144 in this tiny little cabinet. So I sat down on the computer with some measurements and I came up with a mock-up that I think looks pretty great, and so we're going to try and follow that as best as we can. The 1144 has to go on top. There's nothing we can do about that. But if we stuff the FPS 3000 on the very bottom and then put the FPS 100 directly above it, that leaves about 13.5 centimeters, which is like 3U in rack terms, right here below the 1144 for our hard drive. And I think that's going to be enough to slip something small in there. All right, there we go. Let's get that one. All right, FPS 3000, sliding all the way in, looking good. Slides in a little deep. I might need to adjust that a little later, but that looks awesome. For the FPS 100 front panel, I just needed a temporary solution to hold it until the box gets made. So I just took these little L brackets, cut a little notch into them, and I put some screws through the 100 front panel itself, and they just slot right into those little channels, and it holds it perfectly. And that looks amazing. The 3000 here still needs some spacers because it can push way too far in, but that's something I can deal with pretty easily. But this, I think, is gonna work perfectly. Now we just gotta do something with this tiny space for drives up here. It is definitely tight, but with this tray in here, I can slide it all the way out, slide it all the way in. It sags a little bit in the center, which causes it to rub on the top of this. That's gonna be a problem for mounting stuff, but we'll burn that bridge when we get to it. All right, let's get the big boy in here. The 1144 itself. Come right in the top here. It slides all the way back in. There we go, that's coming together nicely. Final piece of the puzzle is this gaping hole right here for our little tray. I've got some weak magnets stuck to the frame right there, and I've got some little brackets on this piece here, so that should just hold right in there like that, and that looks excellent. Every computer, no matter how super, needs some kind of storage. For this 1144, this right here is a pretty ideal setup. We have the pream 15450 and a DSD dual 8-inch floppy. We have our fixed storage, our removable storage, and well, aside from the fact that we can't use the pream with the 1144 because we don't have the right controller card, it's like, this is clearly not gonna fit in this tiny little spot here, so we gotta think smaller. And my ideal solution would be something like this, a CDC 9410 Finch drive. It is pretty large, but it does just fit perfectly in our allotted space here, and I could even slide it over and have enough room for removable storage over here. The only problem is that even though this is a pretty awesome and period correct solution, there's not a single Unibus controller card out there that can interface with this drive. So ultimately, I do want to get an 8-inch drive working on this machine, but for the time being, I think we're gonna have to go just a little bit smaller still. Which brings us full circle to these options. Again, man, we've been here before, and I don't like any of these options, if I'm being honest. Firstly, they're all way too new. I like to adhere to a rule of nothing newer than 1984 in this room, and these are all from the mid to late 80s. But I can hear you hammering away furiously on your keyboard telling me to just emulate the hard drive, throw a Unibone in there, and just be done with it. But that's just not my style. I don't enjoy emulating hard drives. I really love seeing real deal spinning rust being used on these old machines. And so I'm willing to compromise on the 1984 rule if it means that I can get some spinning rust into this 1144, at least until we can find a proper 8-inch hard drive that is period correct that we can use with this machine, now that we know that one can actually fit. So these are really just kind of a temporary solution until we find that unicorn drive. So what do we have here? We've got two RA70s that are broken. They both fault. One of them doesn't even spin up. We have an RA72 that sometimes spins, sometimes doesn't, and sometimes goes ready and sometimes throws a fault. And we have an RZ56, which is a 50-pin SCSI drive, and this is currently Schrodinger's drive. I have no idea if it's good or bad because the only SCSI controller card that I have for it is the USDC card, which is completely and thoroughly undocumented, so we don't even know how to plug this drive into that card and get it to even spin. However, since the RA72 is the only drive to come up and go ready, I think it might be our best chance at survival here. So we'll go ahead and flip the power switch on. We'll see if it's gonna play nice today. What we're hoping to see is for the drive to spin up and to do its self-seeking tests, which is gonna take a little while, and then this little green light down here to come on and go solid. All right, it's starting its spin up. And it's gone ready. It seems like that went really smoothly, but I have a whole shot that I threw away where it actually faulted out with a 110111. And I've done a lot of testing of that RA72 off camera, and it seems to spin up and go ready about 7 out of every 10 spin ups, which is not great, but like literally the best thing that we have right now. Which is like a terribly sad state of affairs. But 7 out of 10 is enough that I was thinking maybe we could plug it into the 1144 here and start fiddling around with it. And in order to do that, we need these two cards right here. These two together make up the UDA50, which is the controller for SDI drives like that RA72. The only problem is that when I plug these into the 1144 and flip the power on, I get the DC on light flashing and my 15-volt rail has been obliterated. And it turns out that the second card, the 7486, has a dead short on the 15-volt rail. I can measure that at this tantalum right here. And no, it's not the tantalum because the leg is snipped. So there's a chance that this big block here, which is a negative 5 volt regulator off of the negative 15 volt rail, has gone bad. So with us hitting multiple dead ends on the fixed disk front, what about removable disks? That DSD dual 8-inch floppy thing is awesome, but I mean, like, clearly it's not gonna fit. We could maybe squeeze a single 8-inch floppy in there, but there's so much extra electronic wizardry going on inside of that DSD drive that I don't think I could ever get any of that stuff to actually fit inside of this with room left over for a drive. So we need to get smaller. Thankfully, I have this weird looking little box right here. This is a dual TU58 tape drive. They take little tapes that look like this. These are called deck tape 2s. Each one of these holds 256K. And there are 2 drives in this. There's one facing towards the front that you can slide a little tape into like that. And there's another one facing sideways. And that tape goes in like that. And I think the sideways one was so that you could load in microcode. And then the front one was your actual removable media. Now, this is very, very rough for the wear. The capstans here are super gross, and the tapes are notorious for having a belt that goes bad. So there's a lot of physical work that has to go on here, but electrically, this is fantastic because the 1144 has native support for this. It really just communicates over serial, and the serial console card on the 1144 has a port dedicated to it. So there's our game plan for storage. We're gonna keep an eye out for a more stable RA70 series drive or an 8-inch SMD drive that we can use with our Emulex controller, and we're gonna fully restore the TU58 tape drive. So in the next episode, we're gonna dig in deep on the UDA50 over there and try to find out what is causing that negative 15 volt short. If we can get that fixed, I wanna get it plugged into the RA72 and maybe start tooling around and seeing if we can do something interesting. But here's the really important bit. There is going to be a next episode. When I started this episode, I wasn't sure where the series was gonna go, and I had almost no motivation to actually work on any of this stuff that's just been giving me grief. But now that I've got this looking as beautiful as it is, my motivation is through the roof again. So we are gonna go hard on this machine because look how awesome this thing is. I have to work on it now because it's so cool. Sometimes you just gotta do the aesthetics first and worry about making it all work later, because that's what really gets you fired up. So I'm really excited. I hope you guys are really excited for some supercomputing goodness. And I want to thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.